Hey everyone, Tactics here, another Mythic Manaforge Omega boss guide, where in this video we're going to be going over the FRACTILLUS encounter, discussing changes on the highest difficulty, WeakAuras to help you handle wall placements and breaks, as well as other tips and tricks to help you and your guild bring down this big rock. I'll be putting out similar guide videos for the rest of the raid as well in the near future, so if you find this one useful, make sure you do subscribe for those other ones. Otherwise, let's just get started with the changes on Mythic difficulty, which does include a new wall type. So you're going to get these brittle walls now, which are a light blue wall in color, and they're going to apply this stacking shadow dot to your entire raid whenever they are broken. These spawn in the third and fourth wall slots in each of the rows, and generally your goal will be to only break one of these per set. Though that being said, there is a scary overlap at the end of the fight where you're forced to break two of these, but outside of that specific situation, which is the scariest overlap of the fight, you're generally going to be breaking 0 or 1. So some additional raid damage, especially combined with the extra circles going out on the entire raid. So that is something to keep in mind. Other than that, there are some additional walls now created by the tank hit, the Shockwave Slam, where it now creates 3 walls instead of just 1. So this is now going to be much more important to move around depending on where your wall placements are throughout the fight, as opposed to just leaving it in the corner like you do on normal and heroic difficulty. Luckily, you don't really think about that at all on this boss fight because it is absolutely 100% solved by a weak aura. Now, we use the liquid pack, which is now publicly available, so you can get that for yourself if you want it. Also, the Northern Sky pack, they'll essentially be doing the same thing, so you can use whichever is better for your guild. And to show you what this actually looks like in game, just the actual weak aura pack itself, basically, this is going to show text above a player's head where you should be breaking the wall break. It'll basically tell you like a color, an assignment where you should be going to break or where you should be going to drop your wall. And on top of that, there's also these position assignments which pop up at the same time. Very useful. It shows exactly which cone you're supposed to go to on top of having the text, and it also is associated with a marker. Obviously, that does mean you need to make sure your markers are accurate to the weak aura you are using. I believe both Northern Sky and Liquid use different marker colors, so whichever one you're using, make sure you double check where their color assignments are, because obviously if you put Moon in a different area than we have it here for the Liquid weak aura specifically, you might have some confusion. So just double check the position assignments and make sure that all the markers are in the correct area. This is probably the most important thing to make sure your entire raid has and is on the same version or same page, same week or whatever, because this will shorten your prog tremendously if everyone is just following this week, or it's just one of those bosses where if you blindly follow this week, or it has figured out the complications, it solves everything. It is insane how easy it makes the fight. This is a very, very low pull count boss, and obviously this guide's coming out before the Soul Hunter guide because this boss is just straight up easier than Soul Hunters now. So this is where you should be heading after Forge Weaver. Now, for these spreads, because talk about how you're going to be getting more of those circles going out during the wall break phase, we did have this like general guideline of spreads here, and unfortunately I don't have the raid plan. We just are given this image, so you can reproduce this for your group if you want to, but basically these are just kind of general guidelines and are not mandatory positions for that phase, because the main thing is you don't know who's going to be assigned to break the walls, and you don't know necessarily where exactly they're going to be assigned. For example, like you maybe know there's going to be wall breaks on Star, but you don't necessarily know that the Druid assigned to Star is going to get that wall break. They might actually get this Moon wall break, and maybe you have this Death Knight assigned to the Star wall break. That's just how the weak aura functions. The weak aura is not going to consider these positions, and so the actual real player positions every time a wall break goes out are going to be similar to this, but not exactly. So you need to be ready to adapt when they happen. If you, for example, like I said, if you're a DK over here and you get assigned to the Star break, you break Star, you're not going to make it all the way over here, right? So during the spread phase, when everyone has their circles, you have room to spread like in this area, or maybe you can identify once you move to spread, oh, hey, there's no one in this spot because maybe this Druid is gone assigned over here. So you can like slot into there. They're just general guidelines. Do not tunnel them. Even if you have the mobility to get to your spot, you don't necessarily need to do that, especially if it risks you cleaving other players. And again, the priority in this phase is to dodge those initial small circles and then get your spread for the big circles, which detonate shortly after. You will notice the tanks are stacking up in the corner, but outside of the tanks specifically, I don't actually recommend you stack anyone if possible. There is more than enough room to not have that happen. Now let's get into the kill itself, where there's a couple things I want to mention. First, comp-wise, we are using 2 tanks for healers because the whole tank buff change recently basically forces you to play a second tank, and the whole 1 tank shenanigans, the race roll first, was not going to be something that was going to trickle down, I don't think, too far into the lower ranked guild. So 2 tanks here definitely required. You will also maybe notice that I have pressed my potion during the pre-pull timer. So this is something that is potentially good for people that have damage around the 5-minute mark in like execute essentially. So you can pot a little bit early, assuming you are going to the enrage. That is the big thing. Our kill times, our low pulls were around 5 minutes, 15 seconds in terms of the timer, which is right at the enrage. If you are later on in the patch, you have more gear, you have more stacks of the raid buff, this boss has been nerfed again potentially, and you're killing this boss lower than the 5-minute timer, I would say this pre-pot is not worth it. But if you're killing this boss in the next couple weeks and you are pushing to that enrage, you can pre-pot at like 10-ish seconds, 15 seconds on a pull timer, and that will give you a second potion in your execute damage if you are specifically a spec that can take advantage of that. If you are a very front-loaded spec, you should just be potting on pull, especially if your cooldowns last the entire duration of your pot. But if you're a short duration cooldown spec or a spec that has execute, think about the pre-pot if you are going all the way to the enrage. Now, there's really not a ton to talk about. I guess I'll just kind of let this video play. But like I said, the WeakAuras does kind of fix the bulk of the issues of this fight. And so outside of that, there's just some minor tips that I wanna point out. One of them is associated with the tank walls. So one thing we have, and you'll actually see a personal note on the side of my screen, with the tank wall timings and the marker they are going to. What we wanted to kind of make sure we were calling out specifically were all these sets where the tank wall doesn't go to square or star, because square is on the far right and star is on the far left. So every other tank one, these one on triangle, the one on moon, diamond, and circle, these we wanted to specifically call out, hello, the tank frontal is going to this lane. Beware. And the reason for that, and you can see it kind of here are the people with the initial set of walls. They go out, they launch them, boom. Now, for example, imagine this tank wall was now being dropped on green, you know, instead of being on blue. If I'm going to drop on green, this comes out in 4 seconds. If this moon player is now trying to walk across back to the safe spot, which is currently on diamond, they can just walk straight through the tank wall and just get 3 stacks and immediately die. It is very easy to lose individual players to these tank walls when they are, you know, close to the raid, not directly on the edges. And so calling that out can help to reduce some number of deaths again, specifically when the walls are not on the far edges, right? If we're on square, like this case, like I'm going to jump over this guy on moon. It's kind of chill. It's not really a big deal. Same with on star. There's not really going to be anyone over there because of course they should be hanging out in the safe spot, which by the way, the safe spot in general kind of bounces between these 2 lanes in the middle. It does change twice throughout the fight, once you bounce to triangle and then once you bounce back to diamond. So that can be another very, very important call to note. Whenever the safe spot does change, make sure it is emphasized that someone is calling it so that the entire raid does move to the new safe spot instead of getting a wall cleaving them through the face. Now, the other thing to talk about, I guess, is the tank buster change. So this is a recent change after the race world first to force you to 2-tank it, where this debuff is now just a flat physical damage amp. And FRACTILLUS does kind of have hands on Mythic difficulty. He melees pretty hard. And so if you ever lose aggro, or if you ever are potentially targeted with the crystallized debuff and have to break a wall when you are not the tank with the debuff, you need to be very careful. So you're going to see in like 1 second, I'm about to get 1 shot because I ripped threat. So that's yeah, boom. That is an important note. Obviously not ideal, right? Watch threat. Very important, especially depending on what your tank comp makeup is. But the other thing that I was saying, right? If you get knocked away from the boss and you are the tank without the debuff, you need to make sure 2 things happen. 1, you are quickly getting back to the boss immediately, forcing your way through people if needed to get into melee range of the boss so that you are getting meleeed and not the other tank. 2, just before you actually get knocked away, press your taunt on the boss. This will force the boss onto you for the next 2-3 seconds, however the duration of the taunt debuff is, and for that time the other tank is guaranteed to be safe. So a couple things that you can do there to mitigate that. It didn't seem to happen very frequently during our kill. It happened occasionally, but I do wonder if this will be fixed at some point. But still, before it is fully fixed, confirmed, I just want to make you guys aware of that specifically. Other than that, it's really just like the overlaps of the mythic walls breaking, which there aren't a ton. Like I said, a lot of the wall breaks, can fast forward a bit here, are singles or zeros. I think the most dangerous wall break happens like the last wall break of the fight around 450. And so this is the one where you're going to want to make sure you have good defensive. Yeah, this is the double. This is the only time in the fight where you should have 2 stacks of this mythic wall dot. And this is where you want to make sure you have either personal defensives, you have raid CDs running that can hit the whole raid. Obviously, we also had a couple of DKs just kind of throw out AMZs randomly towards, you know, players. It's not going to cover really a lot of players just because of the nature of the fight, and we're all spreading out anyways. And especially like if you have big personals, that is the best spot to use it, including immunities. This is where we stacked all of our immunities on this specific overlap to help make those players a bit safer. And this, again, only happens once in the entire fight around 450 on the clock. Just a little bit before 450, 445 is probably more accurate. So that is kind of when you would want to make sure you have specifically quite a bit of coverage. But otherwise, I mean, this boss is kind of just like all about following the WeakAuras, right? And here's the safe spot adjusting about, what is this? A minute 15 to the fight. A little bit earlier potentially, that's when we adjust. But again, outside of the tips I've given, this fight, there's not a lot going on here. It's probably easier than Forge Weaver, honestly, in its current state. So it's kind of if you've beaten Forge Weaver, kind of a pretty free boss, assuming you're able to get the WeakAuras set up correctly. Again, make sure everyone's on the same version, make sure everyone's on the exact same WeakAura, and that will make your life infinitely easier on this boss fight. But that is it. It's a pretty short one here. Hopefully it was still useful. If it was, make sure to subscribe for more Mythic boss guides discussing the remaining bosses in this raid, as well as even more beyond into the Midnight expansion. As always, I have to shout out all of my amazing Patreons for their continued support. Appreciate you guys, and I'll see everyone in the next video.